The things that don't come back right. The Relentless came home 14 hours early and didn't answer when they called her, and Commander Yale Dross was already pulling on her jacket before dock control finished the sentence. Station Edgefall occupied the only habitable band on the threshold, the Terminator line, that narrow highland corridor where the scorched dayside and the frozen night met in permanent negotiation. It was not a comfortable place to build. The compact had built there anyway, drilling foundations 40 meters into basalt, hanging the outer modules off cliff faces like barnacles on a hull. The wind never stopped. It had a sound, low and constant, and everyone stationed at Edgefall eventually ceased to hear it. Dross had stopped 3 months ago. She heard it again now, walking fast through the transit corridor toward the docking ring, because her body had decided this was the kind of moment that required all available senses. The dock control feed showed the Relentless on final approach, a mid-tonnage survey escort, compact and utilitarian, her running lights cycling through standard entry configuration. She looked correct. She looked like a ship coming home. What she wasn't doing was answering her comm. She was also 14 hours ahead of any timeline that made operational sense. She corrected course at the last possible window, drifted 3 degrees off the docking vector, then brought herself back clean and berthed without a scrape. Dock control logged it as a navigation casualty, crossed it out, then left the notation sitting there unresolved, which was, honestly, the most accurate representation of what had happened. Dross was at the airlock before the pressure seal finished cycling. She had been a fleet commander long enough to know what a crew looked like after something had gone wrong. She had seen them after battle, after catastrophic system failure, after the particular slow nightmare of losing someone in transit and arriving home with a body bag in the medical bay. She knew the textures of distress. She had learned to read them quickly, because quick reading was how you kept distress from becoming something worse. What she found aboard the Relentless in the first 60 seconds had no texture she recognized. The crew stood assembled in the main corridor, 11 of them, with a loose, directionless quality that didn't resolve into any formation. 7 humans, 3 Dreth, 1 Velhari. The human faces were wrong. Not wrong in the way shock made faces wrong, which had its own shape, the slackness, the 1,000-yard orientation, grief pulling the features downward. These faces had simply stopped moving. Human faces moved constantly, even at rest, a continuous micro-expressiveness that most other species found either fascinating or deeply unsettling. These were still, flat and still, as though something had pressed down on whatever generated the motion and held it there. The 3 Dreth were 2.1 meters of dense muscle and scale, dark gray shading into deep green, their cranial ridges visible above the crew collars. None of them looked at her. They were reading the air. All 3, independently, cycling through the same behavior. A slow tilt of the jaw, a pause, a reset. Scenting something that wasn't registering. Their amber eyes, when they finally oriented on Dross, tracked correctly. The scenting didn't. It ran automatic, compulsive, the way a response runs when the input triggering it isn't there. The Velhari science officer stood at the corridor's far end. She was 1.9 meters upright, her exoskeleton deep amber shading toward brown, midlife, by Velhari reckoning. Her bioluminescent markings ran along her thorax and upper arms in a pattern that should have held the steady blue-white of a calm nervous system. They weren't steady, they cycled. Blue-white bleeding into gold and back again without cause, the emotional stress color rising and fading to a rhythm that matched nothing in the room. No conversation, no movement, no escalation. Something inside her threat assessment architecture was responding to stimuli the environment wasn't providing. Dross stood in the middle of that corridor for 5 seconds, which was as long as she permitted herself. Then she gave 3 orders in quick succession: full medical sweep, hard lock on external communications, Nobody off this ship until she said otherwise. She cited operational security. She didn't yet have the facts to justify it. That was not how the kind of decision worked that she was making. The interviews took 4 hours. She conducted them herself, one at a time, in the Relentless's briefing compartment, with a medical officer present and a recording running that she would decide later whether to include in the official log. What emerged was not a story. It was 11 stories, broken apart and reassembled in the wrong order. The Dreth chief engineer, a 2.2-meter solid of dark green scale named Vethak, his cranial ridges flushed deep red-purple since docking, told her the ship had turned back after 4 hours. The survey coordinates had been unreachable, he said, a navigational obstruction of some kind. He could not describe the obstruction with any precision, but he was certain about the timeline. 4 hours out, they had turned back. The human navigation officer, a young woman named Karis, whose face was still showing almost nothing, had no memory of turning back. She remembered completing the survey run. She remembered the grid sector, the sensor passes, the routine of it. She remembered heading home. She had no memory of any moment in which those two states, doing the survey and heading home, had been separated by anything at all. This held across all 11 crew members. Each of them had a 4-hour gap. The gaps did not overlap. Dross had her technical officer run the numbers twice, because when the first result came back she assumed error. There was no error. Vethak's gap ran from hour 4 to hour 8. The Velhari science officers from hour 5 to hour 9. Karis had lost hours 6 through 10. Staggered across the crew in sequence, each 4-hour window offset from the last, patient and methodical, as though something had moved through them one at a time. The math meant that at no point during the missing window had all 11 crew members been unaware simultaneously. Someone had always been conscious. Someone had always been flying the ship. None of them remembered being that person. Her technical officer found the hull scoring an hour later. Fine parallel striations across the forward dorsal plating, spacing consistent with high-velocity particulate impact or the outer edge of a directed energy event. Not combat damage, too uniform, too clean. More like the ship had passed through something, or something had grazed her in passing with great care and precision. The striations appeared nowhere in the Relentless's sensor logs. They appeared in no crew account. The hull bore the marks of an encounter the ship had no record of surviving. Dross stood in the forward docking bay and looked at the scoring for a long time. Then she found a quiet terminal and opened an encrypted channel to Archspeaker Sane. Sane was 280 years old and had the kind of voice that had been used as a diplomatic instrument for so long it had become one, calibrated, precisely modulated, capable of holding enormous quantities of concern inside the syntactical structure of a reasonable question. He answered quickly, which meant he'd been monitoring Edgefall's communications traffic and had noted the blackout she'd imposed. He didn't ask her directly. He asked if there was something he could do. She told him what she needed: clearance access to compact incident archives, specifically any reports from threshold-adjacent survey operations in the last 5 years. She wasn't asking him to pull the reports himself. She was asking for the door to be opened. He opened it within the hour. 1 report, most of it redacted. The unredacted portions described a survey team returning from near-threshold space 3 years prior. Pattern of disorientation noted. Crew reassigned. Investigation closed. The final line was the only sentence that hadn't been blacked out, which meant someone had made a specific decision about what to leave visible. It read, "Discontinue all survey operations in Grid Sector 7 Veth, pending further assessment." The Relentless had been operating in Grid Sector 7 Veth. Sen delivered this without editorializing. He offered no contextualization, no careful procedural scaffolding, none of the diplomatic framing he used when he wanted someone to feel the situation was being managed. He transmitted the document and went quiet on the channel. Sane always had something to say. His silence said more than anything else had. Vethok came to her at the third hour. He led her to the forward sensor array housing without preamble, moving through the lower access corridor with the contained efficiency of someone who had been building toward a moment and was finished waiting. His cranial ridges were still flush dark. He had been scenting the air continuously since she'd first boarded, and now she understood it wasn't agitation. He was genuinely trying to locate something. He opened the sensor array housing and showed her the cabling. A section of the primary relay bundle, thick braided fiber, precisely routed through a conduit that hadn't existed in the ship's original technical schematic, had been rerouted. Cleanly. The kind of clean that came from someone who understood exactly what they were doing and had not rushed. The work matched no crew member's technical profile. Vethak had checked every profile against what he was seeing, and the gap between the most qualified person aboard and the quality of this work was significant. More than that, the rerouted cabling was functional. It performed a function the Relentless had never been built to perform: passive reception on a frequency far outside the ship's original sensor suite design parameters. It had been running continuously. Vethak had checked the logs. It had been running since before the crew regained their memories, which meant it had been built during the window when no one was watching. Something had performed maintenance on the Relentless, or had performed something else that resembled maintenance from certain angles. Dross stood in the access corridor. Then she asked Vethak what the frequency was. He told her. She wrote it down, though she knew she wouldn't forget it. She called Sane back. This conversation differed from the first. The first had been a request for access. This was something closer to a confession. Not a word Dross used easily. She told him what she suspected rather than what she could prove, that the Relentless's crew had made contact with something at the survey perimeter, that the contact had involved a form of interaction the crew had experienced but couldn't encode as memory. Something that moved through them deliberately, one at a time, keeping the ship operational while it worked. That the ship had been modified during that window by an agency that was not the crew, modified in a specific direction, toward reception, toward listening. Sane listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her the redacted report hadn't been buried by the Navy. A compact diplomatic channel had buried it. The original investigation had assessed the contact as intentional. Whatever had occurred in Grid Sector 7 Veth had been done to the crew, specifically and deliberately, and someone at a level above his current direct access had decided the contact would not be officially characterized. He told her this was the first time he had said that sentence aloud to anyone holding operational authority over assets in the region. Dross thanked him. She meant it without warmth, the way she meant most things, as a precise acknowledgement of something real. 6 hours until the review board arrived at Edgefall. She made 3 decisions in sequence. The first, pull the Relentless's crew off the ship entirely. She quartered them in Edgefall's station proper, framing the order as routine post-mission decompression. Isolation watch at level 2, language standard enough to move through the paperwork without snagging. Several crew members didn't argue. They accepted the order with a quietness that told her they had been waiting for someone to make it. They had been aboard the ship wanting to leave it, and unable to name why strongly enough to say so. She gave them the reason. They took it. The real reason was that the rerouted cabling was still running, still listening. And she didn't want 11 people aboard if whatever had built it decided to do something further. The second decision was to write the report. She spent 90 minutes on it, meticulously. Every provable fact made it in: the early return, the communication blackout on approach, the divergent crew accounts, the hull scoring, the rerouted sensor cabling and its anomalous function. She wrote in the precise language of mechanical anomaly and crew disorientation. the language that classified the incident as a navigation and systems event, the language that kept jurisdiction with the Navy. She knew which words would trigger escalation to the compact body that had buried the last report. She did not use those words. She accepted the limitation as the price of keeping any thread of control at all, because a thread was what she had, and a thread was something. The third decision was smaller. She went outside. Edgefall's exterior observation platform sat 2 levels above the main docking ring, cantilevered over the cliff face on reinforced struts, open to the Terminator wind on 3 sides. The day side stretched east, scorched rock plains, silica crystal formations catching the permanent sun at low angles and throwing light in flat geometric sheets, the dried beds of seas gone for geologic ages. To the west, the night side began where the temperature began to fall, the frozen methane flats invisible in permanent dark, ice storms moving at the edge of perception, like something breathing slowly at a great distance. The wind moved between them without stopping. Dross stood at the railing with her jacket closed and watched the Terminator line, where the 2 halves of the world met and refused to resolve into each other. And she thought about a crew that had come home with 4 hours missing and a ship that had been taught to listen in their absence. Her communicator registered an incoming signal at the survey perimeter frequency. She checked the origin, 48 light minutes from Edgefall. No ship in range, no relay beacon in service at those coordinates, nothing the compact had put there. She checked the signal content, silence. 4 hours of it, precisely timed, transmitted on the exact frequency the Relentless's rerouted sensor array had been built to receive. She stood on the observation platform in the Terminator wind and listened to all 4 hours before she went inside. She didn't know what she had heard. She knew that was not the same as having heard nothing. She knew the difference between absence and a message carried inside absence, and she knew which one this was, and she knew she would have to decide, in the 6 hours remaining before the review board arrived, how much of what she knew would appear in the report she had already written. She stayed outside until the cold made staying outside a decision rather than a default. Then she went in. The Relentless sat in her berth below, hull scored in fine parallel lines, sensor array housing closed over cables that hadn't existed before and were still listening, patient, continuous, to a frequency no one had designed the ship to hear. The crew slept in station quarters, or didn't sleep, their faces slowly remembering how to move. 48 light minutes out in the dark between the stars, something had said nothing for exactly 4 hours and said it directly to the ship it had modified to receive the message. Dross had no answer to give back. She wasn't sure that mattered. She was no longer certain that not answering was the same as silence. The Terminator wind moved between the hemispheres as it always had, as it would long after Edgefall was gone. The permanent cold pressed against the station's walls from both directions at once and held.